I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the Moondrop May, and this is the Moondrop Aria 2. Now I've got both of these IMs on the table for a reason. They're both pretty new in the Moondrop range, and well, for a long time, Moondrop's Aria has kind of been the go-to recommendation for a lot of people at around an $80. And now they've got the Aria 2. Honestly, it's more of the same with a little bit nicer build quality, and the price is up to $90. But they've also got the May, and while there's some weird caveats here, I actually think this might be the go-to recommendation from now on. But let's talk about it. So now, the big difference that you're gonna see off the bat, and let me just talk about this right now, is the cables, all right? Mostly the cable is the same until you get to the end here, in which case the Aria has a standard 3.5mm connector, so you can plug that into your average headphone jack. And the Moondrop May has instead got a USB-C type connector. So this is not gonna fit into a headphone jack on your laptop or your phone or whatever, but it is obviously gonna fit into the USB connector because it's got a DAC built into it. And it's not just the connector that's different between them. Because this thing has a DAC built into it, it also has DSP, digital signal processing, which just means there's EQ built into this guy, and there's an accompanying app that you can use with the May, so you can customize the sound, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But that is obviously on paper the big difference. Now, price-wise, this is $90. The May is actually only $65 from what I can tell, which is an interesting price discrepancy. Obviously, there's a big difference here, and you might think that that would be the differentiating factor, but I think because Moondrop also has the Chew 2 for like $19, and it comes with this outstanding cable, which you can put on the May, because the May, like their other IMs, is a standard 2-pin connector. You can swap this over to the Chew connector if you want, use this cable, and for still less than the price of an Aria, you can have a Moondrop May that has both a USB-C connector as well as your standard 3.5mm connector. So is that the route you want to go? I'm going to make the argument that I think you should, or at least I certainly would, but let's talk about it and see if y'all agree with me. Okay, so yeah, that is kind of the big difference on paper. We'll talk about the sound in a little bit, but some other things I wanted to talk about in terms of the physical form factor. And honestly, like, this is my main reason why I prefer the May, is not just the cable difference and the options there, but in terms of the fit stability. The May has got, let's see if we can see this on camera well, it does have kind of a custom or semi-custom molded design. And the Aria, it's got Moondrop's very typical, very familiar dynamic driver shell. This shell is not the most stable fitting. It's a little bit on the heavy side, and it doesn't have any fins or anything that will, fit into the folds of the ear. So it just kind of sits there, and basically your ear canal does all of the support in terms of holding this thing in your ear. Whereas the May shell, it's a little bit on the smaller side, and because of that, it fits in a little bit deeper into my ear, but also because it's got this little wing design on the back of it. It also just kind of like slots in a little bit better. In fact, let me do a fit demonstration, not just talk about it, but show you what the May looks like in my ear. And you can see just how wonderfully stable this is. I love an ear shape like this. This is one of the better fitting IMs like I've ever worn. Like, no joke. For $65, it's awesome. It's a little bit on the small side. It is semi-custom molded, and it's not too deep front to back. So it gives you kind of like a nice flush fit. It fits in easy. It's very comfortable. I've worn this thing to sleep and woken up with it still in my ear because fit stability is fantastic. And for me, that goes a long way. Now, that may or may not be your priority, but for me, that matters a lot. I gotta say, I also just kind of like the, it looks like it's a 3D printed resin shell. Similar material to what you see on the Truth Ear Hexa, as well as Moondrop's own like $500 variation. So that's kind of neat to see. Now, if you are looking for the all metal build design, you might prefer the build here on the Aria, at least the Aria 2. But again, remember, just there's a kind of a big difference in terms of fit stability, at least in my opinion. Okay. So yeah, honestly, that is my big reason for liking the May, even if I am not totally in love with the aesthetic on this. I gotta say, the Aria does look cooler, in my opinion. But in terms of fit stability, and that matters to me more, I like that. I guess maybe one other difference to call out is that this USB-C connector that the May comes with Has a microphone built into it with a little inline controller. I actually personally don't like these, but I understand a lot of people do like them. So consider that either a plus or a minus, depending on where you fall in that camp. Okay, so that's the physical stuff, the main differences, and again, the most important difference for me, but let's also talk about the sound. And that's where things get a little bit complicated with the May here, because like I mentioned, it's got the USB-C connector, and it's got an app that lets you tune the sound. So what is the sound of the May? It can kind of be, frankly, whatever you want. And that's both an awesome thing and maybe a daunting thing, depending on how comfortable and how familiar you are with the audio hobby. So let's jump over here to SquigLink, where I've got the measurement for both the Aria and the May. This is, what we're looking at right now is a graph for the May on a standard 2-pin cable, right? So this is, or sorry, a standard 3.5 millimeter cable. So this is not using DSP. This is like the raw sound that you'll get out of a May if you connected it to a Moondrop Chew cable, as I recommended earlier. And I apologize if this sounds confusing. Again, if you're getting into the hobby, maybe this is not the confusion you want and you just want the simpler Aria, but I think it's worth getting a hold of this stuff. So anyway, yeah, this is the frequency response you get with the May, and I would describe this as kind of just like a pretty generic, warmish, mild V sound signature, right? So you've got a pretty healthy bass boost down here, and it's not entirely focused into the sub bass. So you do get a little bit of that warmth added to the general sound signature. Up top, like pretty typical looking, like there's a lot of IMs, frankly, that have this frequency response. So it's like neither nothing special, nor is it a downside. It's just if you're looking for a nice, fun, slightly bassy, mild V-shaped sound signature, like it's pretty balanced. I think this thing's actually pretty good. One thing that does stand out a little bit above and beyond your typical IM in this price range, there is a little bit better treble extension that shows up in the graph. And I think in listening experience, I wouldn't describe the May as an especially airy sounding IM, but it does have a nice incisiveness to it, which I'm gonna go ahead and attribute to this better extended treble. But yeah, I guess maybe just for comparison, let's pull up the Aria so you can kind of get a sense for what the Aria 2 graph's like. And as you can see, it's very similar. The main differences are that, well, the Aria is a little bit tighter and a little bit more adherent to most of these like target frequency response graphs. How much does that matter? I don't know. I'm not going to be a super stickler for the aesthetics of that. But the big differences you'll see down here is that the Moondrop May actually gives you more sub bass, and I think that, okay, how much of that is coming from the graph, the frequency response versus other things, I don't know, but I do think that the bass on the May is tighter than the bass on the Aria. And then up top, there's some mild variations in treble, but it's hard to make too much of these variations given the fact that it was just treble measurements in general are a little bit on the sus side. So honestly, I would just describe these as very similar sounding IMs in terms of sound signature. The main differences that stand out to me is I would say that the May sounds more incisive, a little bit sharper in the attack, right? Especially in like the bass, like it sounds a little bit less bloomy and a little bit more just like solid there. And then the Aria I would describe as sounding a little bit more open maybe, but also a little bit softer and a little bit bloomier. Those are kind of like vague terms, but honestly, that's how I would describe the primary differences, assuming you're using a 3.5 millimeter cable. Now, again, where the May gets interesting is that it's got, let's go back here real quick, it's got this USB-C cable, which allows you to connect it to a phone, and I don't have it connected to the app right now. Obviously, it's not plugged in, but there's this Moondrop Link app. And I believe this is only available on Android right now, so this is notable, all right? If you want to get into the rest of what I'm about to talk about, you're gonna need to be on Android. Eventually they'll get it on iPhone, I'm sure. But yeah, you can connect this May to your phone, and then you have full parametric equalizer, which means that you can tune the IM to sound almost anything, like anything you want, provided you know what you're doing. And SquigLink is actually a pretty good tool for doing that. I'm not gonna go through a full tutorial on how to do that, but it is nonetheless pretty good for that. What I was also gonna mention is that there are some limitations with this app, and they're kind of weird limitations. In fact, there's also some weird limitations just on this cable in general. I don't even have the limitations on the top of my head right now, but like there's, sometimes when I've used it and maybe they're updating the app, so who knows what the state of it is now, but like I couldn't go below 40 hertz or something like that, or I couldn't go above 10 hertz, or if I was above 10,000 hertz, I couldn't increase, or I couldn't lower. I don't know, there's just weird limitations in terms of what gain and sort of what kind of negative gain you can put on your filters and what the value of the Q factor is. And if none of that means anything to you, that's okay. You don't need to know what that means, but if you're into parametric EQ and you just want access to everything, just know that there are some weird limitations with this app, and I'm not totally sure why. The other thing that's notable is that, well, the DAC, this whole DAC setup that Moondrop's got going on here also has some weirdness. So a couple of things that stood out to me when I was testing this thing, all right? One, I use this on multiple devices, including I've got a Pixel 4 XL, I've got a Samsung Galaxy, as well I've got my digital audio players, my Hibi players. When I had this thing connected to my DAPs, for some reason, the parametric EQ that was baked into the DAC was not being applied. It was just playing it as if the sound was coming without the EQ, okay? That's a very awkward way of saying that. But yeah, basically the EQ was not being applied when I was using this on my DAPs. And I don't know why. They're Android DAPs. I'm not sure why. But that was a weirdness. And then there's some other weirdness in terms of just weird audio artifacts that I get when I'm listening to this thing. Especially I'll hear them when I'm in between tracks or when I start a new track. I'll just hear like these weird, almost sounds like lightsaber sounds. Now they're like quiet and they're kind of in the distance. You could ignore them if you really want to, but if you are easily bothered by stuff like that, do note that Moondrop's DAC implementation here is not the cleanest, okay? I'll be honest, it didn't really bother me that much. If I was primarily interested in using this thing as a USB-C IM, it wouldn't stop me from using it for sure. But if you're looking for the most perfect USB-C IM, you might need to spend more than $65 for it. Okay, so that's kind of like some weirdness with the cable, but I did want to talk a little bit more about the frequency response. And I'm gonna go back over here just because, again, the parametric EQ is where you can start changing the frequency response. So out of the box, when you put this thing on the cable, you can see that the frequency response gets a little bit different. And now it might be subtle, but I would say that this is actually the better sound. To my ear, no doubt, it sounds better in the standard EQ. In fact, I love this sound. I think it's a really, really good sounding IM. It's just kind of like a laid back neutral, a little bit on the warm side, not overly aggressive in the bass or in the treble or anything like that. Like it's just a nice kind of low contrast, low vibey, neutral sound with a bit of a sub bass boost there for fun. Yeah, and mixed with the characteristics, kind of that incisiveness that I described of this IM. Look, it's not especially incisive, but versus the Aria, I do think that the May sounds a little bit more incisive. So combined with those characteristics, like this is a pretty pleasant little sound, especially for 65 bucks. Obviously, you're not having any treble untowardness. There's no sharpness or sibilance or anything like that. Just a really nice little listen. And again, because it's parametric EQ, you can play around with it. They've got a bunch of their own built-in EQ. So if you don't have, again, if you're not super familiar with parametric EQ and you're not comfortable with making those adjustments yourself, you can pick the ones that they've got baked in. I've actually only graphed 2 of them. So I've graphed their standard and their VDSF between these, even though the VDSF one does align a little bit better with my target here. I think the standard one is my preferred. The VDSF sound was a little bit on the bright side. Not a bad sound by any stretch, but a little bit on the bright side. And this one was just really well balanced. But if you did want to get into EQing this, I'll just give you a very, very simple presentation of how you can use squig.link. So you go into the parametric EQ option, and on squig.link, oh, we've got a little tutorial if you need that. But yeah, you can just kind of like, let's say you want to hear what the Moondrop May sounds like with no pinna gain, all right? And if that doesn't mean anything to you, I'm apologize. We're playing fast and loose with the terms here. But let's go with like that, right? You can significantly reduce, I think, what am I doing? It's not doing what I'm thinking it should do. Significantly reduce the, oh, okay, I know why it's doing this. Apologize. Nope, I don't know why it's doing this. Great demonstration of squig.link. Anyway, you can use these tools to preview what you adjusting or basically applying PEQ filters inside of the app will do to the frequency response of the May. And again, it gives you a lot of options, a lot of different possibilities for the sound if that's what you're into. And like I said, like, I'm personally not the biggest USB-C listener. Most of the time I listen to this thing on the 3.5 millimeter. And so most of the time I was listening to this thing on the Chew cable. And again, with the Chew cable, this thing's still a little bit cheaper than the Aria. You still have the option of the USB. And yeah, I don't know. That's kind of why I personally think the May is now the way to go. If you've got about 80 bucks and you're looking for an IEM, you get some options. You can go with a parametric EQ on the USB if you want to go that route, or you can just listen to it on a 3.5 millimeter if you're a Luddite like me, and you get a pretty pleasant sound. Not the end all be all. It's a little bit, again, warm bassy sound, but I quite dig it. And out of 5 stars, I'm gonna give the Moondrop May a very solid 4 out of 5. Same for the Aria too. Like, it's still a very solid IM. If you want to check either of them out, I've got them linked in the description down below. Shout out to Shenzhen Audio, by the way, for sending them in for review. And while you're down there, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.